I left the Navy in August of 2000. Interesting time, actually, because right after I left, that the Russian submarine, the Kursk, went down. Mm-hmm. But my captain let me off about a month early. Well, I didn't get out of the Navy any earlier, but I didn't have to go in the final deployment because then I would have had to extend. And the captain let me off so that I can finish school. So I wrestled in school for
where at
University of Northern Colorado.
Okay,
in Greeley. Yeah, are you a wrestler?
Yeah, I love wrestling.
So are you from Virginia originally?
Yeah, I'm from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Virginia, but I went to school at Penn State. Okay. So I did not wrestle at Penn State.
Well, let me tell you. So we have all kinds of cool stuff to get into. So you're from, what part of Pennsylvania are you from?
State College, Bellefonte.
Okay.
Which is like 20 minutes outside of State College.
So was it a hard decision to stay there? I mean, my son went and...
No, so I grew up in Virginia, right? I was born in PA. My family's from PA. Grew up in Virginia. My dad had moved back to PA, so I didn't stay either Virginia or Pennsylvania. And I always grew up a Penn State fan. Like, how could you not? Yeah.
At my house right now, my kids upstairs have wrestling mats that are Penn State.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So both my boys wanted to go to Penn State. He got accepted, and then we went out and toured the college, did a whole thing. I was so fired up, and obviously they're wrestlers, and I think that having the opportunity to maybe walk on Kale Sanderson's team and be a beat up doll for all those savages that are in there sounded fun to him. But then he went and he toured another college campus. He's like, I think I'm going to go here instead. Yeah. So he loves the new school. He just started it. But
where's he going?
He ended up picking the University of South Carolina.
Okay.
And once, I have no idea how he got there. I mean, he had Lehigh on his, he had all kinds of schools. And
wrestle at Lehigh?
Well, we went and it's like, I don't think that he would have gotten a scholarship, but you could walk on any turn. No team is going to say, no, we don't want extra bodies to beat up for our, they're going to be like, bring them all. You got a dental plan, right? So, but Pennsylvania is a powerhouse state for wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, now it's crazy, just crazy with the training centers that they have. And, David Taylor opened up M2 and what those guys are doing, it's nuts. Yeah.
It's not, like I'm not just saying subjectively, like, man, I'm so impressed by what whatever they've been able to accomplish since Kale has been there. But if you look at the statistics, like the objective facts, more people qualify to the NCAA Division I wrestling tournament every year from the state of Pennsylvania than any other state. Yeah. And like my son made the Texas national team, and we just went to Fargo, and he wrestled at Fargo.
How do you do at Fargo?
Not good. Yeah. But he needed that beating, you know. So he got beat up pretty good at Greco and in freestyle.
He did both?
To his defense, no, I don't think anybody.
Did he win any freestyle matches?
No.
Did he wrestle any?
He should have. Games? He should have won two. I think it was just in his head. You know how? Were you a wrestler?
Yeah.
Well, look, you remember what goes into your mind prior to stepping on that mat is like, you have to be your biggest. The problem with wrestlers, painting with broad strokes, the general problem is, wrestlers are also cocky. What's the alternative, right? You could either have too much confidence in yourself because you're getting ready to go into, let's be honest, wrestling is a street fight with rules. It's a combat sport. A lot of MMA use it as a stepping stone to get to certain things, and wrestling is a violent sport, and you're trying to hurt somebody within the confines or rules of this thing. And there's a balance of chemistry within us that allows us to be ready to rotate with adrenaline into a really challenging situation, fight or flight, life or death. But wrestlers have to go through and dry pump their mind to get ready for those things in advance. If you don't prime the pump well enough, you step on that mat, you could be the greatest wrestler, you're going to lose because it's a mental game, right? 90% of wrestling is training, 10% is the alternative. But when you're competing, it's no longer 90% training, it's 90% mental, right? So the whole model shifts from physical to mental, from competing and training, as you know.
So you get your kids to go into it, though. That's good. I scared my kids away from it. I coached them for 2 years, and they fucking hated it.
So it's funny you say that. So, well, it's pretty revealing. So I'm the youngest of a bunch of boys. We're all former military, and we all wrestled.
All right.
So obviously I couldn't wait to get my kids in the sport. Got them in the sport, was our youth wrestling coach. And a couple of years later, my kids were like, hey, Dad, I want to go play soccer. And I was like, damn, I broke it. I fucked this up somehow. And I stopped, coaching altogether. And all sports, I was like, I'm just going to be dad from now on. I'll never be their coach again. And then later on, they came back to it and they're like, hey, because they still had friends that wrestled and they wanted to know if they could get back into it. And I introduced it to them and I stayed as far away. Like, we have wrestling mats. And my oldest that just went off to college, I don't think we ever dropped the mats together. Like, there are times where he'll come up to me and ask me for something, but they didn't want me teaching him anything. And quite frankly, I could respect that.
So my oldest, he's going into high school. He is in high school. So we go back in Georgia August 1st.
Okay.
So he started high school. He went into rock climbing.
Oh, okay.
And so he's like top rock climbing. He's
wow.
top 20 in the country. He wants to go to the Olympics.
Really?
The other one, his little brother, who's an 8th grader, got really into jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see if he decides to wrestle at high school next year.
It transcends. It's a very easy,
It does and it doesn't, right?
Well, there's a few things that are counterintuitive, between the guard. I mean, you want to be on your back where it's the last thing you want to do in wrestling, right?
Yeah.
But
and the mindset, right? Like jiu-jitsu, you're just kind of chilling. You're chilling and chilling and chilling. Then you find your spot and you react quick. Whereas wrestling, you're sort of always pounding.
I think to that end, like as I'm older, I agree. I think I love the jiu-jitsu part more.
I like what it's done for him.
There's a lot of respect that's taught it.
Yeah.
And wrestling is, again, you're getting hyped up to go to battle. And sometimes to be really fired up, you have to hate somebody, so in your mind, you're building up, David versus Goliath. Jiu-jitsu doesn't really seem to be that way. I've got to do it a few times. I did judo before I got into wrestling, and then when I left, I did judo or jiu-jitsu. I actually had to stop because I'm 47.
We're the same age then.
But when I would go there, there'd be some 23-year-old kid that could take my arm out, and I have a day job, right? So I was like, why do I get targeted by all these younger 20-year-olds that want a piece of this? And then finally, I was like, I can't afford to go because I can't afford the injuries. Yeah. So that even my daughter was doing it. My daughter was beating the piss out of everybody, right? So I love those sports. I'm sure that you've had to learn a lot. I see your son learn a lot from a character perspective and confidence. Yeah, being in that.
I like the calmness of the jiu-jitsu. Like, just he's chill, right? In tough conditions, he's chill.
It's flow.
Yeah, it is.
You're not counter striking all that. No. I mean, like, you're literally trying to anticipate.
That's right. It's cool.
I do like that. So how did they get? Well, first of all, Brett, do me a favor, introduce yourself to the people that are going to be listening.
Yeah, Brett Rogers, founder of Katalyst Digital Infrastructure.
That's a unique name. What's the genesis behind the name?
I have no idea.
Come on. Was that Matt that named it?
No, it was me. Look, so I spent all my career really building data centers, right? And I spent 7 years at Google. And as part of that time, I was running the Americas and also implemented a group kind of focused on productizing our portfolio a bit more. Okay. And so I stepped away to start Katalyst because I wanted something that would shift the industry more towards supply chain enabled offsite and modular construction. So Katalyst, right, with a C, had to do something different. So I gave it a K, and that was that.
And then the DI is so that it's not limited to one vertical of industry. It's more like a technology application that could reach other things.
So we actually, started the company thinking data centers would be our biggest bite, and it's been semiconductors so far, although we do a lot of data center. But there's so much commonality.
There's a lot of, we've done, so our whole background is all data centers too, since I left the military, and don't really have a lot of semiconductor stuff, but we've recently done a couple small programs just because it must be even more challenging in that space to get labor than it is even in our industry in the data center side.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an order of magnitude difference, right? When you look at sort of a big data center job, you might peak, 150 mechanics, 300 electricians. You can literally go 10x on all that on a semiconductor campus.
Thousands of people. Yep. Wow. Well, multiple from the brain damage that we hear about from some of these contractors, when we parachute in, we have just people that have just been, it's like PTSD, walking zombies. And there's like, it pays well, but it's a beat down, you know? But that product that you're doing, or that method of approach, which I can't wait to hear more about, it's really something that could apply and transcend into other verticals of industry, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, for sure. Right. I mean, we're interested in anything that people want to push off site. And so what we're focused on is really just defining that supply chain network behind these projects and helping manage the information exchange across them. So, I mean, Chick-fil-A is a company we'd love to talk to at some point. We saw a really cool YouTube video where those guys built a restaurant. I think it was in Olathe, Kansas, completely modular, installed it in a couple of weeks. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, because they're so cookie cutter?
Yeah.
Yeah, good for them. I have to imagine that makes everything more predictable, which is the thing that all the finance
what we all
people
want,
love
right?
most. Yeah. Well, let's back up. So you said you were born in PA, but raised in Virginia?
Yeah. So
are you the youngest of 1, 2, 3? Are you the oldest?
no, oldest of two. So I grew up outside of
And you're
Richmond,
my
Virginia.
age, you said. You grew up in outside of Virginia. Which part?
Richmond.
Richmond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I grew up there, but I always wanted to be an engineer. So it really came down to, okay, do I go to Penn State or do I go to Virginia Tech? And all my friends were going to Virginia Tech, so I wanted to do something different.
Did you start wrestling in Virginia?
I did, yeah.
So, because Virginia's got that's a powerhouse state too right now.
It's not Pennsylvania, but it's decent. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, it's amazing how much talent is coming out of like Pennsylvania and Ohio on that sport. But so you started wrestling in the state of Virginia.
Yeah.
And then, were you any good?
I was decent. I was probably like, I don't know, 85 and 25 or something for my high school career.
What weight did you wrestle?
Ended up at 152.
Okay. Were you a big 52?
Yeah, I was like, I graduated 205.
Oh, so you were a chunky monkey, 52 pounder.
I was cutting a lot of weight.
Yeah, sounds like
I
it.
wouldn't be able to do that today.
Oh, yeah. I used to be pretty good at that deprivation, but now I just get cranky, so I'm old and irritable, I guess. So when you graduated, you went to Penn State, obviously because you had some family in Pennsylvania, or?
Yeah, well, I'd gotten into West Point, and
no
I failed
kidding.
the physical, and that's really where I wanted to go because I had a back injury. And so I failed the physical, and, Penn State was where I ended up, and it all worked out.
So do you mind if I ask what they failed you on?
I had injured my back, and then I had a spinal curvature that they found during that injury. So
Sure.
it exceeded whatever the limits was.
So maybe you got to learn to lie better because I know all kinds of dopes that I have a brother that's a West Point grad, and I get to hang out with those guys and his brother, all of his friends and stuff. But
How old's your brother?
He's a couple years older than me.
Okay.
So we all wrestled together in high school. So he is 49, I guess.
Did you guys do the summer programs up there?
He did. He did. I didn't. He actually went to the Wyoming Seminary in Pennsylvania to wrestle for prep school before he went in. Yeah. But so that's crazy. So what did you want to do in the Army if you were going to go in?
Well, I was just.
You were just like,
I had
I'm
no
going to go
idea,
in.
man. I was 18 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that's a big accomplishment just to get in to West Point.
I wanted free college, right?
Well, I think that had a big influence on my brother. My dad's like, listen, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
So, and it was the perfect place. I mean, he'll tell you that if he didn't go there, he probably would have not graduated college. And I mean, he's a lightning rod. He graduated, top percentage of his class at West Point, and went right out and was flying Blackhawks, and
That's cool.
had all the things. But he's a wild card, so he definitely needed that structure, right?
He didn't end up in data centers?
No, he ended up in healthcare, but I mean, he would have loved it on this side of the ball too. I've tried to drag him in. I'm like, you should come over here and run stuff for us, but he just loves that healthcare industry so much. It's like recession proof, he thinks. So, but when you moved, did you know like, hey, I want to be an engineer, but like, you're an industrial engineer? Is that what you were?
Yeah, that's what I went to school for.
But
I had no idea what I was going in. No,
but why engineering? You just knew I wanted to be an engineer?
I have no idea. I think I just thought that you could get a decent job if you had an engineering degree.
Okay.
I like math, like science.
Well, when you graduated, did you go right back to Virginia?
No, let's see, where did I end up? I ended up in upstate New York for a while. So I worked for Gould's Pumps, who got bought by ITT. And so I worked as an industrial engineer, but one of my first projects.
Like Rochester, like Buffalo?
Yeah, Seneca Falls.
Oh, okay.
So between Rochester and Syracuse. One of my first projects was building a plant. I loved construction, and that was it for me.
So is that what got you, like when you came out, because I was checking before, I didn't understand the background, not that I was creeping on you, but this is really the first time we've met, right, Brett?
Yep.
And by the way, thanks for coming, Austin. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I saw MGAC, which is a phenomenal shop. Obviously, they're very, very good reputation for just having great professionals there. We used them too. I've worked with plenty of those guys in the past. What were you doing prior to going to MGAC?
So let's see, a couple things. I ended up in Northern Virginia.
Back home? Oh, no, because you were from Southern Virginia.
Yeah. So
Okay.
no, I was just there was a job there.
Okay.
Working for Jerry Reich, if you know Jerry.
The
I
name's
think he's
familiar.
back in the data center world now.
Was he a broker?
No, he has a project management firm. I can't remember the name of it.
Jerry Bright.
Reich, Reich. So he had a firm called Reich Management, and then he went and did a few other things. I think he's back doing some stuff now. But I was working with Antion, who got bought by General Dynamics.
Okay.
Did a couple data centers with them, and it was a joint venture between them and the Army. And then ended up over at AOL, and Greg Rolls at AOL gave me a chance to run a lot of really cool stuff. And that was really like, at that point, I loved data centers because I didn't have to think about what color the wall was or the type of carpet, right? It was technical construction. I love that.
Interesting. So what was the magnitude of those programs back then? If you're doing it for Lockheed, I mean, it's a government.
Yeah, well, I
program.
mean, these were big data centers. They were 2 megawatts.
But back then, those were still not small.
No, they weren't small. They were cold, and if they were big, they were 2 megawatts, right?
Was it all 2N back then?
It was mainly 2N. Yeah.
Okay.
Raised floor.
Now that AOL data center that you're at, is that the one that eventually became like a DFT or a CoreSite data center?
I think the one that I worked the most in, Stack has now.
Stack.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Like Rick Waddle.
Yep. Yeah, and of course Rick was there when
Was
I was
he?
there, right?
He's a good dude, man.
Yes.
All right, so then that's how you really got into your data center. Your first one was with.
Yeah, really, it was Antion with the U.S. Army. Then went and did some stuff with AOL. I went over to India for a year and a half with AOL and
No kidding.
built their campus and data center in Bangalore.
How does someone approach you and be like, hey, listen, this whole emerging industry that's in its infancy seems like it's pretty stable. You should go to India.
I have no idea. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids.
Oh,
I
you
was just
weren't?
like, I don't know if I had been out of the country at that point in time. And I said, yeah, I'm going. Like,
I'm in.
I'm your guy. Yeah.
That's crazy. What part of India did you go to?
Bangalore.
And I mean, you love curry now, or?
Yeah. I mean, it was cool, right? Like
Was
the
it?
energy is different. Yeah. I mean, you really learn. I think you really learn how to build things when you're building in a newly developing country, because it's not like there's a bunch of practices that are already defined. You don't have a Holder, Turner Construction, or somebody that's built hundreds of data centers to go pull from. So you're figuring it out. And yeah, it was awesome.
So that's harder to figure out because you have to figure by trial and error, it seems like, too, where there's not a lot of good reference points over there because you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, some of the major challenges were like getting people to wear shoes, right? This was
For
very,
sure.
very early in the industry over there.
So I don't even know if it would, like, I'm going to ask you this question, and I don't even know if time is a factor. Was there a lot of regulations? Like, it's not like you were going through a 13-month entitlement process over there to get permits for air or running engines. Or was it like, hey, you guys have to have someone that says, yes, we know what we're doing, and then you guys are off to the races and you just do it?
So we had a developer do the base building. And the biggest challenge that they had was land consolidation. So you end up with ancestral land claims, even though it's maybe 20 acres, right? You might have 200 owners that you need to deal with and kind of clean up all the paperwork with. And then there was an air permit. There was some water permitting. It's, at least at the time, I'd say it was technically light, but bureaucratically heavy.
So, but from a bureaucratically heavy perspective, is that like it takes a year to get a permit to go over there? Or?
I can't remember the exact time period. I mean, it's been almost 20 years, but yeah, probably 8 months to a year.
So I did work in Brazil and had that whole situation with labor force not wearing shoes. So I've got to see.
Where in Brazil did you work?
The state is Parana and the town is called Curitiba.
Okay.
And it's a very Cosmo, town for. I've built data centers everywhere, but in Asia, and you could acclimate into certain cultures, and you could understand the strengths and weaknesses of certain cultures, or geographies, I should say, to the data center stuff. But I remember being down there, and I'm like, it's a ton of rainforest stuff. Like in my mind, I'm just like, I don't understand how much pent up demand there is for compute here. And then I went down there and realized that they get pretty creative in the way that they build everything. So it's not just a data center. It's, a power plant. It's, it's a million different things that they're using for, everybody was trying to find a way to reuse aspects of a data center to their own benefit as a business, and it was just creative, but there was no red tape. There was show up and this guy's cousin knows that guy and they know each other and they're going to give you approval. Are we good? Let's go to a 4-hour lunch and have more cachaça and then come back and then they'll agree to whatever we're going to end up delivering. It was like that.
Yeah, I did a cable landing station in Brazil with Google and
Where at?
Praia Grande. So it's maybe an hour southeast of Sao Paulo.
Oh, Sao Paulo. Okay. Yeah. Crazy town, right?
Yeah. It's awesome, right?
So, because I know I'm all over the place, but you were at MGAC for a while.
Yeah. So I joined MGAC, stayed there maybe about 7 years. So, Ken Stitchak gave me an opportunity there.
Good dude, man.
It was him and Steve Hay, and Steve had gone to active duty from reserves for a couple of years.
Oh, gotcha.
So I was sort of like the second guy in after to backfill for Steve. And I think it was probably 10 to 15 people when I left. And so I left MGAC to go run Gigafactory 1 for Tesla.
So I saw that. So what was that like? That's early. It was like 2014, 2015-ish?
Yeah, it was early days of Tesla.
And where were they doing that Gigafactory? Was it Nevada or something like that?
Yeah, it was in Reno.
Yeah.
So when I took the job, I thought it was actually going to be here in Texas. My wife went to Baylor and has a bunch of family down here. So we're like, all right, Texas is cool. Ended up in Reno. So I commuted back and forth for a year.
From where though?
From Northern Virginia.
Okay, so you got it. So she's like, I'll move to Texas. You could go do your thing there and you could commute shorter. She didn't do that again?
No, but Tesla was insane. It was like building, when you were a kid, I assume you built tree forts and stuff like
all
I did,
the time.
Right? You'd go
Still
and
do?
sort of like, yeah, exactly. go find a building site, steal out of the dumpster, get some materials,
Of course.
build a treehouse. It was like that, but $1 billion project, right? We were figuring things out almost every morning. We were learning more information about the manufacturing process and the partners' requirements, and it was chaos, but in a good way. Also in a way though that I think I get more fond with time. Right after it, I was like, oh my God, like these guys are crazy. But you really see like why Tesla works, right? I mean,
because you just throw a lot of horsepower behind an idea.
A lot of horsepower and a lot of the right mindset.
Yeah.
So the thing I remember, like a very specific thing. The guy I worked for was named Kevin Kassakert. Kevin either reported to Elon or JB, and JB was sort of the other founder. And we were going up with our first steel package, and it was I don't know, $20 to $30 million package, right? It was a big package, but nothing. When you're spending a couple billion, it's kind of on the smaller side. And so Elon wants to know, like, well, what does the steel cost? And this is what it costs. It's this much per ton. Broken it out between commodity, fabrication, erection, handling, logistics. Thought I had all my shit together, right? No, that's not what I asked. What should it cost?
Yeah.
Well, here we have all these historical figures. No. I want to know what's the cost of the iron ore, what's the cost of the coke that goes into it, how many BTUs does it take to make the steel, what's the cost of the BTUs, and like that's just how he thought about it.
He wanted to break everything down.
I believe he breaks everything in his life down to that extent, and it's why he's been able to do what he's been able to do. Right?
Did you ever engage with him? I mean,
yeah, probably 5 or 6 different times.
So, good dude. Seems like I only see him on podcasts and stuff. So.
He's a different dude. Like you didn't really necessarily want the meetings with him, right? He was very, very challenging, very obstinate, but fair, right?
I was like, yeah,
not an unfair person.
You have to find that balance of genius, I guess, right? Where I know there's was Casey Maris working there with you when you were there? Wasn't he part of that program for a while?
No, I think he was doing something over at the Apple campus at the time.
Maybe that's the one he was on. Gotcha. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I've had an opportunity to meet with a guy named Luke Nosek. Did you ever meet him? So he, I think, is the CEO of Gigafund, which I want to say was the financial arm. He worked with Elon and all those guys at PayPal and stuff. Okay. He's part of that mafia, the PayPal mafia, they call it. But he has said, like, listen, Elon to certain people will be viewed as the guy that has the appropriate amount of pressure that he throws on people because he has a big vision and he knows that you're never going to be there if you're comfortable. He also said, if you are someone that doesn't understand how big vision works, then you're going to see him as someone that's very abrasive.
I think he that's a good capture. I think he has a vision that nobody else I've ever seen has, right? Like he can literally see 7 years into the future. He sees something that is completely insane to the rest of us, and he's figured out each and every step he's going to take to get there, and then he's just driving, right? And so it's worked well. I mean, look, we're sitting here in Austin, right? Like what those guys did over there at the Gigafactory Austin in 17 months is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm a really good builder. I don't know if I could figure out how to put up 9 million square feet of industrial space fully fitted out in 17 months. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And not only the date related motivation behind 17 months, but the pressure to keep everybody safe on a program of that volume and velocity, right? And it's easy for people to burn out long before 17 months, right? So that's where you start seeing towards the end of the program is where the injuries typically start coming around.
The cool thing about Tesla projects is there's so many, people who are just mad about Tesla that you can almost always know what's going on. I mean, I think there was a guy that flew a drone around that site almost every single day and posted YouTube videdes of the progress of it. So you can actually watch it get built and see how
like
they
an
went
Ox
about
Blue
doing
camera.
it. Yeah,
Nice.
except it's a drone and the guy's like, snaking around. There's a YouTube channel on it. You can literally watch the whole thing come together and you see how they broke it up into different sections and made it a series of smaller projects and then just brought them together at the end. It's really cool.
Programs of that magnitude, got to be really, really hard to get rolling, right? And the first ones to the wall are the bloody ones, right? Yep. So that's where you have some contractors that probably like always being the first one of those programs. Sometimes I never wanted to be because I felt like that was the fodder, right? So
yeah, well, that was the cool thing about Google, right? Like before I got to Google, the biggest data center I had built was a day N 9.6 megawatt data center. Day one was 2.4 megawatts. It was a good sized data center.
Where at?
It was just TD Bank up in Barrie, Ontario.
Okay.
So people will watch this and think, well, that's nothing. Like at the time,
9.6 is a big
megawatt data center in 2009, 2010, it was big. So I went over to Google and I had my mental framework of like what a data center schedule should look like. And the first project they gave me was in Atlanta, which is why I moved to Atlanta. It was 4 stories, 30 megawatts per floor, so 120 megawatts total. And we were just turning over the first zone. And I put together a schedule of like, I think it was 11 and a half months, right? And I was just, again, using that mental framework from my past. And everybody's like, oh, you're insane. Like, this isn't going to happen.
Like, you'll never hit it that fast?
Yeah. And we didn't, but we hit 12 months. Which I think is still probably one of the faster builds. But understanding the difference in scale was like, what you learn at Google, right? You can't just take a small project and multiply it by 4.
So you were doing the Tesla stuff for the Gigafactory.
Yeah.
And then you left that.
Yeah, I had 4 kids at home and my wife was like, hey, listen, these weeks are not great. And
it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough on the life. So you went back. Is that when you went to Google?
Yeah, that's when I went to Google.
And were you on Kava's team?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was probably 3 removed from Kava at the time.
Yeah.
So I worked for a lady named Anu Reddy when I started.
Okay.
Anu's awesome. She runs all their front-end planning and site development stuff now. So I worked for her. And then over time, that shifted to working for a guy named Dan Costello. Uh-huh. Dan was running global delivery at the time, and Dan reported to Joe.
So a bunch of those guys from the Google Mafia, too, because there's a bunch of you guys that didn't a bunch of them peel off and start Yonder? Is that?
Yeah. So, Aina Murphy's over there. I'm not sure if anybody else from Google's over there.
Oh, I thought there was a few former Googlers that were over there that helped start
There must
Yonder.
be somebody I'm missing.
Laramie actually credits you for being at Yonder.
I introduced him to Aina because I really liked Aina and I really liked Laramie. And they're really, really different dudes. So I was like, all right, this has got to either be a terrible idea or a very good idea.
If you're trying to find a polar opposite group of people to always introduce, Laramie's pretty good at always being counted on as being polar opposite as those other people, right? Because he's so unique.
He's an amazing leader, right? Like he's really amazing at motivating people. And so, and he knows construction, right? And so Aina's also a really good person, but he's more of like the Irish guy, the cost controls background, all the details. So, I think it'll work out well for them.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to kill it. I mean, Laramie's just a hardworking chip on his shoulder. Like if you say I can't do it in 11, then I'll do it in 10,
Yeah.
type of guy.
And he does it.
And you have to have that. Again, it's like the wrestler mentality. Maybe that's why he and I, we kind of grew up in the industry together. We've known each other for years. And I think that's one of the things that we probably connected on back when we were, not that we're anybody's now, but we were even bigger nobodies then, right? And back then, I think that you could recognize those in some of your peers. You kind of fall into orbit with those that kind of tribe up in the same mentality that you have. And I remember watching him self-impose a lot on himself. And I thought that it's rare that you find people that do those things. And that the thing that I always liked about him, I talked to him a lot, was you always know where you stood with him. So that point where you're like, yeah, I've been a GC that worked for him before as well. And let me tell you, man, not that he's a person that loves confrontation. He's also not afraid of dealing with those complicated conversations instead of kicking a can down the road or, hoping a strategy. So he would have, we'd be pressure testing all kinds of discussions all the time, but they were necessary. And sometimes that friction is healthy and necessary. And I found that it takes not everybody has the fortitude to have those difficult conversations.
Yeah. I think he has a Jocko Willink mentality without knowing that he had one.
Yeah.
He takes ownership, right?
100%. He was actually on my first podcast was me, Laramie, and Justin Tinoco of Roasting. Right. So, we vacation with our families together and shit. So we go pretty far back as well. But that whole Google group of all of you, most of those people that, first of all, how did you get to Google? How did you know that that's where you wanted to go? Was it because you knew that they were building massive and you wanted to build massive? Or
honestly, I think
why did you not go to an operator?
I didn't want to get divorced. And, my wife was tired of me getting home Friday at midnight and leaving Sunday afternoon. And
but did Google give you that less travel model?
Yeah. So, initially, right? So my first job was just centered on building this campus in Atlanta.
How big was that campus?
Well, so I think it was their first enterprise data center was there, and that single story, something like 80 megawatts. And then we were building the second building, which was the 120.
Gotcha.
And so I think I knew Kava through, knew him. I was acquainted with him. Yeah. And so I reached out, and I believe they were hiring in like Lenoir, North Carolina or something. And I thought, all right, North Carolina's cool. So I pinged Joe, and I think he said, oh, that's probably already filled, but he introduced me to Anu who was hiring in Atlanta, and that worked.
No kidding. So did you stay in Virginia the whole time?
No. We moved.
You did? You moved down to Atlanta? How'd you like that?
Well, look, when I moved, I thought like, okay, as soon as I have a chance to move back to Virginia, I would, and I'm still living in Atlanta, right? And so within a year, I had a different position, and within a couple of years, I was running the Americas. So as long as I had an airport, things were fine. But no, I loved it. And you know how it is. Like when you have kids, they're so entrenched and they get like caught into the day-to-day, and life's easy. It's a really easy place to live.
It is. Is it, because we built some data centers like Suwannee and Alpharetta, and there's a bunch of data centers out in the periphery.
Yeah, some small ones there. Yeah. BlackBerry had their data center back in the day.
Oh, the old RIM one. That's right. I remember those days. So now you're at Google, and you were there for 70 years?
Yeah, almost 7 years.
What was your favorite part of working there?
I think the scale, right? And sort of the learning side of things. So I stepped into Google thinking like I knew what I was doing. And I quickly realized I didn't have a clue what I was doing, building at that scale and then running an org at that size, right? So I think you see people run orgs like that and you think, well, why are they taking this position or that position? Just the opportunity to learn though and mess up and then figure things out and do better. So I think when I first started taking over other teams and other sites, right, I had my series of spreadsheets and tools, and I was like, well, cool, I'll just give everybody the same tools I use and everything's going to work great, right? And then you quickly realize like, oh, right, that doesn't scale, right? That's not really how you manage people. So I think that focus on management and scale that Google has was pretty cool and a pretty good opportunity to really learn. And, I'm sure I didn't figure it all out, but I figured out a lot, or at least learned a lot about sort of how to scale and lead. So
what kind of, I guess it's a testament to your management or your leadership that you had above you too that allowed you to learn, because it sounds like, hey, we were allowed to learn how to be better leaders. but was someone actively teaching you, or you were just being offered the opportunity to make your mistakes without being punished?
I think a lot of both, right? So Google's very formal about sort of different sort of development programs that they have as you move through different levels in the company. I had great managers in Anu and Dan and a good sort of person to look at in Joe and how he ran the org to figure things out with. And I do think, like many orgs, right, the moment you sort of figure out how to say, yeah, I screwed X up and here's what the circumstances are and here's what we're doing about it, like you'd get a lot of credibility really, really quickly. And so I think that's how people should run things, right?
That's awesome. So when you were there, is that, you said you went down to Brazil and you were doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had a whole bunch of different jobs, but we had a very memorable one was a cable landing station in Brazil.
How big is like a typical cable landing station?
A couple megawatts.
So it's like you said, okay. And then is it all like modularized or?
So this one it was modularized.
Okay.
We had to negotiate with some people who were, grazing a horse on the land and negotiate getting them off the land. We'd negotiate with some local syndicate who used the land for parking because it's at the beach, and so it was fun from that aspect. I mean,
who does that? Do you guys get to do that, or is there someone on your team that's designated to do that?
We had people on the team that would do that sort of stuff, right?
How do you hire
Gary
people for that?
DeMasi has that org, and they're good, right? They're negotiators. They're going out and looking at sites, negotiating with governments, and we had people that we hired too. We had a guy named Fred Braga who's now actually at Google, but he was like an owner's rep that we had down there, and yeah, he handled all that. It was wild.
So you said you got all the way up to the point where you ran the Americas?
Yeah.
Does that include like just the United States, or is that like North and South America?
It was North and South America.
Okay.
So, I mean, what is that now? Maybe 15, 20 sites.
Sure.
And
that's a lot.
All but a couple are in North America. Yeah.
And what were the biggest changes that you were able to learn, like being at a place like that has that economy of scale that they have access to, from supply chain leverage to even labor force? What were some of the most creative things that you were able to take away from that you think are applicable? Because we're going to get to what you're doing right now with your business, the Katalyst, but I'm just trying to build up some of that foundation to help others, because I did spend time like going through your LinkedIn and trying to, I don't just creep on you, I creep on everybody, and I don't do it because I'm trying to validate how great they are. I do it because we all take our own path in this industry, right? Like I was asking earlier, I'm like, how come you never went to an operator, and you stayed on the enterprise side, or you're on the ecosystem side, and there's a couple of different positions you could play in this industry, between working for architects and engineers and commission agents to the trades to whatever. How do people determine what they want to do with their career? And it's always fascinating to me to follow those trajectories, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because you can do well in any of them, right? Like really well, and everybody is doing well. As far as like
was it that you wanted to do that, or you knew somebody that was like, hey, I know the guy at Google? Or was it like, I want to go work for one of the biggest hyperscalers that builds the biggest data centers?
Look, I think I like large, complicated programs. So I was drawn to that, right?
That makes sense.
Google, obviously, like you have, there's Google, Azure, and AWS, right? Like if you want to build big, you're going to pick one of those three. But I don't think that's what kept me there. Like what kept me there was sort of the challenges along the way, right? And again, that's the scale side of things, right? It's one thing. There's people that are really good at leading small teams, right? Yeah. Like if you wanted to, let's say, just go find the most difficult site to build in the most difficult market, there's a certain skill set that's going to show up at that job site and lead a team.
Open heart surgery versus general practitioner or brain surgeon.
Right. And then there's sort of the side of, okay, how do we scale that now and do it 10, 20, 30, 40 times?
Yeah, the program level. Yeah.
And I think what I really liked was learning about what worked and what didn't, right?
So is that where you kind of evolved to, is trying to, instead of not as an individual contributor, but now is being the overall quarterback, is trying to implement new processes or protocols or means and methods of delivery?
Within the vertical that I was responsible for, right? And understand, you have a couple different engineering teams, you have different procurement organizations. My organization was focused on construction, right?
Well, we're some of the big org. So what do they challenge you with? Because it's like that one question, like Elon's asking this guy, like, well, how much is the steel?
Yeah.
Whatever number you give, if you don't have a point of reference, and I doubt that he's understanding how to analyze and interpret the marketing trend on steel in real time, at least. Like, what's the point of giving you a number if you don't know where it's at relative, to what's good or bad? And when you guys are doing the stuff that you guys were doing, did you have somebody that knew more about delivering data centers from a construction perspective, that knew how to validate what you were presenting to them for cost? Or they knew that was good, or were people just arbitrarily challenging you?
We had specialists, right? So like, we talked about Ana, the guy that spun off to set up Yonder in the Americas. So he was in charge of the controls team, right? And so those guys knew
so they broke it
cost
down
and schedule
on
inside
controls,
and out, right?
On controls. So he became like a controls expert.
Yep.
And then you just took every level.
Yeah. So, as a construction team, we had to pull together from different resources, and figure out how the pieces went together. Maybe the hardest part was sort of figuring it out, what the business wanted, because when you're in an org that big, you have a lot of stakeholders that are VPs or even higher, right? So figuring out what is the goal of the business. Is it cost? Is it schedule? Is it something on the engineering side of things? And sort of finding the balance there.
But it's all the same. It's just, are you talking about, it's just a volume disparity, right? It's not like you were creating different products for Google, are you?
You're sort of, I think within Google in particular, Google's a very engineering driven company.
So they had different data center topologies?
I think they're constantly iterating, right? Oh. They're iterating to go after a faster schedule or,
yeah, that makes sense.
Decreased dollar per watt.
Okay, so they're constantly optimizing. They have people that are subject matter experts that are just, they're going out and going deep into that topic or that subject and then coming back with whatever best and brightest is now. And then with that, you add or incorporate.
Yeah. And I think that's like when you talk about the operator versus the enterprise side of things, that's massively where there's a difference, right? Mm-hmm. And the operators, you'll remember, they used to be a little bit that way, right? Like DuPont Fabros used to talk about their ring bus electrical distribution topology. Operators don't really talk like that anymore, right? They're really very, very good at executing very, very fast and on schedule, right? So it's less about the technical side and more about, hey, this works and we're excellent at tactically moving this forward. And that would be fun too, right?
So, if you have 7 years at a place like Google, you could spend 20 years at a smaller shop and still never hit that volume of stuff delivered. And you're like, I just like big projects. By the way, what's the biggest program you did? Not from a capital perspective, but like how many megawatts at a click or?
Probably around a gigawatt in a year.
Oof.
But that's a huge team, right?
Yeah, but that's global. I'm obviously the lion's share of it in the States, or
this was
that's just the
Americas.
Americas.
Yeah.
A gig
but that was
in the
probably
Americas
I don't know what percentage of the program it was, but it was a large percentage of the program.
And does that burn you out?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it sounds like you're having fun, and you had access to all the resources and tools you needed to evolve. It sounds constantly, right? Where they're never building the same thing because they're always trying to refine it. Why would one leave?
I think to have sort of less boundaries when you are working in an org that big and that matrixed, right?
Hit a plateau.
There are challenges and sort of boundaries to work around.
So was that the genesis behind Katalyst?
Yeah, well, Katalyst, look, I told you I have an industrial engineering background.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really, for almost my entire career, sort of applied the mental framework that I learned in industrial engineering to construction. And so the concept of sort of the intersection of supply chain, offsite, and traditional construction were always something that was interesting to me. We did, some of the very earlier modular programs at MGAC back in 2007 and 2008 with cable companies and others. So I always had an interest in that. And I think, obviously didn't see what was coming with the supply chain, but it felt like the timing was right to start to think about that.
So let's talk about all that stuff, right? So how old is Katalyst?
18 months. So I left Google in March of 2021.
And it was to start Katalyst?
To start Katalyst, yeah.
So the incubator for Katalyst, what triggered that? Obviously, when you leave a company to start something, some seed was planted long ago in your career that's cultivated over whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So at what point did you realize?
So look, within Google, I set up an org called FIA with the help of some other people. And it was, again, sort of that productization and standardization side of things. And so I saw what was working and what wasn't, and really saw it more as like a collaboration and information challenge than a tactical one. And so by that, I mean, almost any time you build something modular for the first time, right? You go in and you say, okay, we're making this decision. We're going to invest X number of dollars in this containerized or skidded or fully modular solution. And we think it's going to return Y. And what happens almost every time?
It doesn't fall like you planned.
Exactly, right? Almost every time you realize, okay, well, shit, we missed the mark on that. And oftentimes those initiatives get killed, right? And so then you go to another initiative. I think within Google, I got to see the fact that if you stayed with something, you could iterate 3, 4, 5 iterations. And almost like we talked about with what Elon did really well with Tesla, he always knew where the price should be and got it there. So that was something that always sort of drove me was, okay, how do we get there and how do we get there quicker? And it becomes a matter of thinking about a building or a data center a lot more like a product, right? Like we tend to think about electrical systems and mechanical systems and structures. Well, what happens if you start to understand these as components or parts of an overall product, and then you start to break down what should this actually cost? Why doesn't it cost that? And it's really a data organization and structure problem. So, that's ultimately sort of the start of our technology platform was how do we let people do that in a little bit easier way?
So you're aggregating large volumes of data and then refining that data in a way that allows you to pivot through supply chain challenges or labor problems.
Yeah, I mean, it really starts more with data structure and organization, right? So if you think about a supply chain behind a vehicle, right? So you've got your Jeep. What's the supply chain behind that? Obviously, you buy it from Jeep. Jeep might have, 20, 30 different tier 1 suppliers, and then you get into tier 2 and 3. And by the time you're done, there's probably 800 or 1,000 different companies supplying something to that Jeep, right?
Yeah.
And in order to optimize manufacturing, those manufacturers focus on every single one, right? Somebody understands each step. But in order to get there, they first have to understand that the design or the delivery of that product organized to reflect those steps. And so that's sort of the start of, I think, building construction moving that way, is to understand the building as a series of parts and pieces.
But so that's a psychological shift, a significant one, right? So how do you that's a lot of people that you need to get to start buying in on that process.
Yep.
And because that's a lot of information that also needs to be shared, which the collection of that data is always taxing, right? So how do you implement something that I'm not suggesting it's painful on the upside, but on the downside, it pays dividends in the long term for cost or speed to market? Or
this is probably the biggest mistake that we've made in our first year and a half. Is we originally started out focusing on value stream mapping, applied production models. Very, I don't want to say complicated, but complicated to the construction industry, like to manufacturers, that's sort of standard. And what we realized is like that's not really where our customers lived, right? So it got back to really just, okay, how do we take it one step further? So instead of understanding switchgear, how do I understand switchgear as the federation of 5 or 6 or 7 components? And maybe 1 or 2 of those components is actually causing me disruption in my deliveries or my lead time, right? It's the transformer, relay, or breaker. Or you remember what happened with Hussey Copper, right, earlier this year. Then you get a bump in the bus. I think it's incrementally breaking things down. We tend not to go, most of our clients tend not to go too far in
because I'm
things.
like, so FIA, by the way, what does that stand for?
Field Implementation and Assembly.
Okay, so that is that's how you're breaking down all the components and having it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
how do you think about a building like a Lego set, right?
Yeah, but that's if. So if you're doing that and you guys were able to do that program because you're at a big shop that has a lot of stuff in orbit around it that you could always pull from. I mean, these types of analytical tools or whatever you're doing to set up that, it sounds like you set it up for you guys to optimize the processes of what you were doing there. And then you realized that methodology or that approach to looking at the delivery of the platform or the delivery of the product, whatever it is, it's best if you align the optics to that across the board. But what if, does that mean that there's only a certain, like, is it a person that spends a lot of money on construction that is the most ideal candidate for, and what is it, by the way? Is it a software tool that you put together knowing on, if you collect this data, then you can paint this picture.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
how does it work?
The tool basically does like 3 or 4 simple things, right? The first thing it does is just organizes.
Is it a software tool? What is it?
Yeah, it's a software platform.
Okay, so when people, is it an overlay? Go ahead.
When people become a customer, right, we set up an account and they have access to the software platform. So it's online, cloud-based platform. First thing.
And it's just a cloud-based platform that highlights all of their supply chain.
Well, once they get there, right, it really starts with, okay, do you have packages? Some of our clients come on, they say, hey, we have 100 packages that are repeatable and we want to start managing. Great, right? We have a customer success team that helps them load them. Others say, we don't have any packages, at least not consistent packages. We want to start driving that. So we have to set up those packages. So when we're talking about a package, right, we're talking about sort of a parametric piece of design information. What's the reference design that's associated with that? What's the fab and assembly data that's associated with it? What are the standards that need to flow down to the second, third, fourth tier of the supply chain for quality, safety, logistics, things like that? What's the information that needs to be presented to the field team so when this thing shows up, you know, the installing contractor knows, okay, what do I need to bring to the site as consumables? What loose parts am I getting with this? What equipment do I need to offload, right? What special equipment do I need to test and inspect? Those sorts of things. So it starts with those packages. Within each one of those packages, the user can build out a supply chain map as deep as they want to go and create the associations, right? So I want MPS associated with this package, or Accelerate, or Cupertino, or Intermountain, or whomever it is, right? That's my first tier. If I want to go to the second tier, now maybe I want to understand who's building the enclosure, right? Is it Weldco? Is it AZZ? Whomever. I can start to map it out. But it becomes iterative, right? And I don't think there's any new information being generated. Like, this information already exists, right? In order to build a job, you need it. It's just pulling it into a common environment.
Yeah. So that seems like so someone buys the software and you're basically showing them how to break down every aspect of their product.
Not every aspect, the ones that they want to, right?
But you're going to create as many components as you can.
You can, sure.
So that you can, because the data, I mean, you could, installing construction programs and you could have, Schneider switchgear and it has, we have 10,000 points. Like, I need 7.
But look, and here's what matters, right?
So what happens if you have
what's
too much
my
data?
lead time? What's the inventory
So
on
that's
each of
what
these
it's for.
components? Where are those components? What are the current constraints? What's the production status across, right? Am I going to get my stuff on time? Is there disruption? Now you could go, you could extend, right? And so again, we started out maybe a little bit more complicated. We were thinking about like carbon footprints and this and that. But what people care about are really those 5 or 6 or 7 things.
Yeah.
And being able to.
So that's it. Is getting the data that's most useful.
That's most useful.
Okay. So you're going to collect a shit ton of data. So I guess when you have the software platform, it's going to take some people that are going to be going through contracts or going through manufacturer specs and uploading and putting all this stuff in there. Is it like
if people's models are clean, a lot of that can just be automatically. Okay. And when I say clean, right, are they properly encoded? Do they have a work breakdown structure? Do they have families associated with them? But I mean, as you know, like it's a rare thing.
You're putting that back on your MEP teams and all your design teams to make sure that everything is. I get it. So you guys found so much value in that. What was the genesis for creating that? Were you experiencing like supply chain delays, or were you just trying to reduce the costs?
Optimization, right? This was really before the supply chain stuff hit to the extent that it has over the last year or so.
With that impact, did that benefit you guys or hurt you more?
I don't know. I think about that every now and then, and I think it certainly benefited us from the perspective of like, I don't think construction industry 5 years ago even thought much about supply chains, right? So it created visibility around it. I think it hurt somewhat in the sense that people are out like fighting these fires that like really needed to be solved 12 months back. I mean, we see it all the time where people are suddenly realizing, shit, I should have ordered that generator 8 months ago.
Was there predictive
analytics? Can you help me
analytics?
with that? And I'm like, well, no, we can't help you with that, right? Like you need to be in front of that from day one.
But would your software allow them? Is there, if you took that data, is there algorithms for predictive analytics that say, hey, listen, based on the data that you're giving us, although it's arbitrary to you, when you look at the linear trend, it tells us that there's a potential red flag for some sort of pain point in your critical path of supply chain here.
Yeah.
Would any of that data would
So we run part of our backend on a platform called Palantir Foundry. So Palantir's a company that Peter Thiel and some others founded, focused on big data, came out of the national security side of the world, where they were consolidating multiple data sources from different security assets and using that within the defense and intelligence world to predict what might happen, right? And so it's a cool company, public company. They rolled out a commercial, version of their platform. So we use that on the back end for data analytics and integration.
Like a sandbox where you could simulate and play with?
Yeah, and also just kind of plug in other data sources, right? Because that's the challenge. And you know how it is in the construction industry. Everybody has a different platform. Every supplier is running a different MES or ERP system. Yeah. How can we get those to function like one? And so Foundry helps with that. But the truth is, like, we don't do a lot in that space yet. We think in the future, perhaps, right? But you need a lot of data and a lot of samples before you get there. I think what we see customers struggling with is just understanding how dynamic the supply chain is. Right, something that used to be 18 weeks is now 36 weeks, or something that was 42 is now 28. And trying to right time those purchases, like that's probably our sweet spot for the next couple of years, is just bringing more transparency to that side of things.
Interesting. So I guess the ideal person for that would be whoever runs the procurement team, right, at some data center operator or large enterprise group that's building for themselves still, and they're putting a lot of the weight on their supply chain that give them an X amount of data, knowing that sometimes those guys don't, right, because they don't want to say, hey, it's going to be 9 months, because
lose the deal. Yeah,
you see what I'm saying? So they may say, hey, no, we get them in 5, and then hey, we're going to be late, and how do you get the buy-in from the ecosystem?
Well, look, I mean, we can't make people behave well, but I think bringing things into a common environment starts to create a little bit of accountability, organizing information, right? It does help in both directions. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've had an integrator or a vendor call and say, hey, I got a PO, it's for Rev 14. Do you really mean Rev 14? Because I just saw Rev 16 last time, right? Like, data exchange is two ways. And I think both sides benefit from good controlled data exchange in both directions. I don't think it's a one-way road.
Is this software like intuitive enough? Like, if you could have PMs run around construction sites all day with an iPad with Procore running, and they could run the whole program from that. And is it something that is used like that on a day-to-day?
I think it's similar.
Can it be? Is that
Procore for supply chain, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like it's a dynamic work model.
I hope it's intuitive enough, right? We certainly hope and work to make it intuitive.
Well, I'm sure it's iterative too, though. Right? I mean,
Absolutely.
You get feedback, or even you wake up and you're like, you know what, we should probably tweak this. Yeah. I don't know, but do you get a lot of buy-in from your clients that allow you to, or they ask for custom things that you see a trend for, and you're like, maybe we'll make that a standard?
Yeah, we're trying to get better and better at that. I mean, that's sort of the concept of product development within, the technology space. Is you don't want people to just tell you what they like. You really want them to tell you where your baby's ugly, so you can go fix that,
sure.
Right? And so it depends who we talk to. The different personas are more comfortable than others in providing that. But we also we do a lot of tracking to watch. Okay, how are people using the system? Where are they getting hung up? Right? You can trace somebody's mouse. And if you trace 100 people's mouse on the
Stopping on
screen
the-
and realize, oh, look, everybody's getting stuck over here, maybe we have to do something to improve that. Right?
So, how do you get people to start using, like, at what phase do you get introduced into, if someone was going out and building a greenfield now, how would you get involved with that? Where is the phases in which you roll in? What's the most ideal? I'm sure it's a couple different.
Well, there's really probably
places.
2 ways. One, we have clients that say, hey, we've built 8 of these projects and we want to start to salvage the data from them and sort of set everything up.
What are those clients? Are they operators? Are they
Operators.
Okay, so
operators, hyperscalers,
is that
and a semiconductor client is probably the largest one.
okay? But data center operators, is that probably the biggest target because they are doing the most? I mean, that's the primary line of business.
It's repeatable. Yeah.
They're going to do a lot more than a typical group that may only build 5 or 10 megs. Every few years they need it for themselves, right? So they're going to be doing shit in multiple markets, and they're always looking to optimize and standardize. So you have operators, and then you have large hyperscale, you said, and then high tech or semiconductor.
Yeah, so advanced technology manufacturing, right? Electric vehicle, battery plant manufacturers, semiconductor. And so in some cases, right, it's going in and saying, all right, we've got closeout documents on a bunch of projects, and we want to sort of pick and choose the best of those and create a standard to move forward with. In others, we're getting involved very early, and it's almost like even BOD or pre-BOD.
I was like a design phase
of starting to like organize, okay, how are we going to buy this? What do we want offsite? What do we want on-site? Who needs to collaborate from the different partners around that?
Do you advise on that, or do you just give them a tool that allows them to arrive to those things on their own?
Well, we don't want to, because it's quite difficult to staff that way and also run a technology business. But we do get involved in that. More so, we look for partners on the program management, project management side of things who can come in and help and have some expertise in that space.
So will you outsource that as needed? Like have a channel program of MGACs that you could call on and be like, hey, can you go help set up this client that wants this product?
Yeah, I mean, it's early days for that, but certainly something that we're thinking about. And there are a couple that we're working with right now with different clients.
What for that software, how do you see it being? I'm going to ask, like, I have a million questions. So, but it's only simply because I want to make sure that when I leave, I understand this product well enough where I could always, hopefully capture your own narrative without missing the spirit of what it is that you guys are actually trying to get accomplished. But you're trying to get to the point where this product will be used on a daily basis by someone within the facility?
I don't know about somebody within the facility.
So it's not an ops person.
Right. It's not a CMMS platform or anything like that. It's
a dashboard, though, that who has access to?
It's the construction stakeholders, right? So owners, general contractors, trade contractors, and supply chain participants. And so if you think about those major groups, right, and yeah, you have integrators, you have AEs involved in that, but can we organize those 4 or 5 or 6 major stakeholder sets around the packages that are being executed offsite, right? Whether it be a big integrated assembly, or it's a pump that has a long lead time and I need to have confidence it's going to show up at a certain time.
If I put all the data, I aggregate all the data and I put it all into your platform, will it show me like caution areas of concern? Will it automate?
Yeah, so we do dashboarding around that, and you can set up, let's say you've set up your program and you've standardized, okay, gen enclosures are at 28 weeks and we're making our finance and purchase decisions based on those 28 weeks. If information tells us, oh, that's gone beyond 28 weeks, yeah, it's going to raise a red flag. Or within production, right? We're tracking production, we're tracking site readiness, and we're tracking logistics. You have plan dates for each of those. There's information that informs you how each of those are tracking, right? If they get off track, it's just typical red, yellow, green. And it just gives you the visual indicator. All right, it's red. I need to drill in and find out where the information is showing me that, right? So it's supposed to be at this point at October 17th, and now it just suddenly shows up at November 3rd. I know I have an issue, right? Therefore, I've got to go either mitigate that or plan around it.
So if it's managed by the construction team, but let's say it's a data center operator that uses outsourced PMs, who owns it? The operator would own the Katalyst
look,
software, right?
We really have two primary customer types.
Yeah.
Right. Owners, right? So owners are hyperscalers and operators and contractors. So whoever technically pays for the
They have
license,
the data, though.
they own the data, right?
And with that data, they can tell you, okay, so I'd imagine there's benefit to having that data as the GC, because then it helps.
Yeah, if I'm a
ensure that there's-
GC, right, and I set up a top level library for a client or maybe several clients, and then I can start assigning out those packages, right? When I set up a project, maybe I have 200 packages. I'm taking 10 or 15 of them and saying, all right, I'm cloning those into this project environment because I know they're repeatable from last time.
Sure.
I know the data that's associated with them because I'm constantly updating it through the system. And I don't need to go duplicate that or search for data that might be bad. Look, there's nothing we do that you couldn't do with a team of project engineers and spreadsheets, like, which is pretty much true with almost all technology.
Well, that's
right?
the crutch that most people were using
Yeah.
until you said, hey, look, I'll make a standardized crutch, right? And then
Yeah, and that's our hope, right? Is people go, oh, your crutch is cool. Like, we want to use it.
Well, as a GC, I could see the value in having it, because one of the things that you can offer to your clients is the ability to tap into that data that gives you trending information that you can use, that's intelligence or IP that makes you maybe a little bit more valuable than another GC, right? Because you have a
It
better
is, but we're very, very committed to, like, your data's your data, right? Like, I can't take your data and use it to inform somebody else, right?
Well-
So as long as you have data on there, you're making use of it. Yes, it becomes sort of a self-licking ice cream cone and gets better with time.
But if you're the GC and you bought the license and you did it because you want to see data,
Yeah, if you want to see the data from your projects and start to identify those trends, absolutely.
I can't see why they wouldn't be able to apply that data without saying this is somebody else's project that we saw, but being like, we know as contractors that these are the things that are happening. We track them and we have it, memorialized. In
No,
this.
for sure.
So I could see that there's value in that, because that's what you're really getting when you're hiring a GC, is someone that has insight to the labor force.
That's
and,
right.
And, managing your OFCI. But I think, a lot of those guys are getting involved strategically on the VMI strategies, just simply because they're managing the coordination logistics of where that gear is coming and landing and arriving.
Well, and in the bi-directional side of it, right? Like, if you talk to the GCs and the integrators about what their biggest problems are, it's often the OFCI, right? Like, I don't know what I'm getting.
100%.
I don't know when I'm getting it.
100%.
I've got to design to accommodate for all this. Like, it should
That's
be
why I'm like, it
mutually
should be of
beneficial.
value.
Right.
So is it priced like Procore, where it's like they price Procore is based on revenue, right? So however big the company you are is proportion to how big you are, right?
It's interesting, right? Like, when I started the company, I thought a go-to-market plan was like, I'd go find 50 companies, and I'm like, oh, those are the first 50 I'm going to talk to, right? And this is, as you know from starting a company, the first year in particular, you think you're good at something, and then you learn just how bad you are.
Yeah,
and then you get a little bit better, and you think you're good, and then
Very
you learn just how
humbling.
bad you are. It's extremely humbling. So from a pricing perspective, Procore's S1, right, which is the documentation they filed before they went public, I've probably read that more than any, like, single source of data, because it's a very interesting way to look at things. And so our thought was that, yes, it would be a percentage of revenue type model, or a percentage of capital program type model. And what we found, though, is particularly with GCs and then even some owners, because of the way that they either capitalize or don't capitalize costs and do project cost accounting and funding, there's a preference for a project level license. So, well, we thought the Procore model was the greatest. We talked to a lot of owners and GCs, and like, oh, we don't like that model.
Nobody does.
So, from our side, we do have a model like that, but we have a per project model, right? Where it's X number of dollars per project per month, just based on the size of the project.
Gotcha. Based on the capital size.
Yeah. And it's like 0 to 50 million, 50 to 100, and 100 and above. It's not too scientific, right? It's just tiers of pricing.
No, I get that. And it's got to be proportionate to the amount of labor that goes into it. But so when you were doing this, Google, it sounds like the need, why you stood this up in the first place was generalized broad stroke blanketing of this is a incubator for optimization, right? But now, when you were doing it there, I'm not sure if it was considered a cost center, or if, whatever it costs for the SG&A to maintain that program, or the P&L, or however you had to look at it. let's say it was arbitrarily $1 million to staff that team, to give them the resources to go do all those studies and collect that data. Did they save $2 million down the line? And is a byproduct of all that optimization? And I ask that question because, like, if you're a data center owner operator right now and you do have all those project engineers with spreadsheets, will it make some shift, you know?
Well, I think there's a couple things, right? And we went back and talked earlier, like, what is the North Star, right? So early on within Google, the North Star was schedule more than it was cost, right? So we had significant schedule benefits from taking this approach. You know, and then
because you're buying stuff so far out in advance, or
well, and you're also reducing site level scope, right? So if you're reducing site scope and you're reducing total hours on site, and you're moving towards more of a level loaded labor model where you don't have a big peak that you need to somehow work through, right? Your schedule starts to benefit. And every client's a little bit different. At this point, it's almost necessity, right? I don't think there's anybody in our industry, or very few people, running at less than 100%, right? And everybody's really running at like 110 or 120%, and trying to figure out how to do it along the way. So I think that's where, at least now, the operational efficiency comes in, is can I have 6 project engineers on this program instead of 8 or 9 or 10? Because now I'm starting to standardize this and share it across different projects.
Is there an order of magnitude? I guess that's why it's operators and hyperscalers versus maybe it's not as necessary or beneficial to a smaller group that has a less. Is there a sweet spot? Like, hey, if you're spending more than 10 million, it makes a lot of sense, because it'll say arbitrarily here, I'm not speaking for you, but is there something that is like, we're owners reps? You came from an owners rep side. You know, typically when we put in an owner's rep on a program, it's not a layered over the top overlay to cost. Typically we go in there, and between the means and methods that we could approach a program, or with the network that we have to supply chain challenges, we could help reduce the cost of the program by either driving efficiency and schedule or other methods to reduce the cost enough to at least cover our costs. So we're not a net new.
Yeah.
So for your program, your product, at what point, you know, is there a sweet spot where, hey, if you're above this much, it makes the most sense? This is, if you're up here and you're not using us, you're crazy. But if you're down here,
I don't know. I think that's what we're trying to figure out with our pricing model. When we set out to build the company, we were certainly focused more on the larger projects.
People are motivated by pain or fear or frustration, right? So is there?
Well, I think the other side of it is, like, people are incentivized by certainty, right? And so if you think about, we spend a lot of time talking, and I'm sure you get in negotiations with clients. You know, Kirk, I don't think you need 4 people on this job. You really need 3. So what are you negotiating over? 1 person year, right? 25 grand a month, 30 grand a month, whatever it is, right? It's very small amount. Now the cost of missing a schedule is what? Like
everything.
Yeah.
In this industry, you could miss budget, but you cannot miss schedule.
Right. I mean, we've heard numbers from many owners, right? Somewhere between 10 and $70 million a month of missing a schedule, right? Like, and it's not that's related to revenues, right? And sort of how they're monetizing whatever asset they're putting in place. You get into some of that advanced technology manufacturing. I mean, think about the big, gigafactory on the other side of town. I mean, what does that have to be? If you look at what they're running, I mean, a month's probably worth $500 million or more in revenues. It's crazy numbers.
So that makes more sense.
Right. So I think it just depends what the owner's motivated by. We're not expensive, right? I mean, as a software, we can't go out and charge millions of dollars a year, right? Like what we're trying to figure out is how do we get it down to $1,000 a month? Because then it's sort of a trade-off between price and number of people. Most of the people we work with are between 5,000 and 10,000 a month.
Have you ever thought about offering it as a service instead of, I mean, like, yes, they have the software, but you actually give them somebody for the duration of a phase of the program to where they get the initial level set of data into this thing. So it's easier now they're just managing it and adding things incrementally versus building it, which is obviously way harder.
Yeah. Yes, we have thought about that. And I think that's where we're more on sort of like, okay, are there partners who can benefit from providing that service? People who have business models set up around consulting and services, right? Because it's a very different business model.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's new, obviously the adoption rate is hard at the beginning because new is hard to wrap my mind around. Like, even if people don't like Procore, if they're going to another program and they have the opportunity to pick between projects or, 3 or 4 different other applications, they're going to be like, look, I'll take that one because it's very easily predictable on what you're going to get every
Low
time.
friction's good, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
High speed, low drag, right? So I think, looking at that product, I could see a lot of value in it. I could see why you started it and why you guys created just a whole business around it. But I could see how it would be complicated for people to discover it's the right fit for them if they're not hurting somehow, right? So if they're limping along or hey, that's what I have this guy for, or something like what are
it's a really hard sell. If like somebody's doing 2 or 3 projects a year and they're just crushing it, like
why do you need it?
Why should you
what am I going to get from it, right? Yeah. But the people that are having supply chain friction, budget overruns, schedule overruns, those are the people that
who are scrambling to put out fires at the end of a job because things are showing up late or aren't built to the right level of quality or were built to the wrong design. That's our sweet spot. Right?
So it's interesting because I'm fascinated by all these things because I know that it's got to be something that you need like the herd mentality to buy into, right? There's going to be 2 or 3 groups that take it. And then once it's been validated that those groups were able to, and typically it's the really sophisticated people, like let me rewind 5 years. And if someone came and knocked on your door with this product when you were at Google, would you have bought it?
I certainly would have made a case for it. Yeah.
Okay. So the optics that you're viewing it through now, both as the person that this is your baby and, everybody's baby is beautiful, right? Yeah. But also by looking at it through, if you were at Google still, what would you need to buy that? And then that's your narrative, right? Yeah. Whatever you're using to.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Well, I think that from your level of knowledge, it's got to be hard to view it objectively like I would from the outside looking in, just listening to the product itself. Because, I knew Matt for a while now, right? And awesome guy. And I remember when he was telling me like, hey man, can't wait to tell you about this new thing we're doing. And I still didn't know what it is, and I'm like, hey, when the soup's done cooking on the market message, let's talk about it. Let me know how I could help. Or I would love to hear how, if it's something that maybe it's something that, groups like us that parachuted in and out of these projects on behalf of these clients.
It would be good for groups like you. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it would be something that if we understood it, if the owners reps, and there's a big community of owners reps, we are brought in because some groups that aren't doing it as proficiently or they're not doing it as often, we are exposed to more of the ecosystem. So we get to see how everything's evolving in real time, where some people are statically in an environment where they're working within the construct of whatever their product is to serve their business, right? Yeah. Where we get to be like, well, you could use that, or you could use set of steel, use FRP. I don't know. Just make
I love FRP, by the way.
Well, who wouldn't? Cool, right? Save time, save schedule. It used
to be expensive, but it's not anymore.
It pencils, right?
Yeah, it does now. Yeah.
Can't use it for all things, but you could certainly use it for certain things, and that still shaves a lot of time and money off of programs. I just think of like all those things, those nuances. How do you aggregate those things? And for us as owners reps, our value, we don't pretend to be better than an MGAC or a CPS or any of those groups. They're amazing groups. We just want to be a little bit different, right? And if we have something that allows us to approach it from a different angle, I think that's what all groups want, right?
Our biggest challenge is like not letting people talk us into getting too broad, right? Because can you do this? Can you do that? And it's like,
all things to all people,
Yeah, Procore's great for RFIs, you can use 1 million products for submittals. Like if somebody's having challenges in supply chain, right, whether it be late deliveries or inefficient sort of management or understanding of the supply chain, poor information exchange across the supply chain, particularly down to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th tier. Like that's our sweet spot, right? And so our hypothesis is that there's a big enough market there to sustain what we're doing. And we think it's going to continue to grow, right? Not to say like the supply chain's not always going to be a train wreck, right? It's going to get better. You're starting to see it now in certain areas. But I don't think there's ever going to be a reversion to like, okay, let's just build everything on site with commodities, right? Yeah. Like I think sort of the concept of offsite or modular, it's certainly here to stay. And you look at like how far guys like MPS and Accelerate have come in 4 or 5 years, and they'll be the first to tell you like, yeah, we're still doing offsite construction, but we're shifting more towards like true offsite manufacturing. Like we think there's a big future there, and we think tools are needed to support that, because you can't take manufacturing and run it on Procore or CMIC or PlanGrid, right?
Right. Going back to that product, I think that there's a lot of adoption for modular solutions across the board. And I think the advantages that you mentioned, like shaving time off of construction schedules. I think the QA/QC side, the quality side of building,
quality side's huge.
I think that's one of the biggest factors.
I would agree. Where do you think the gap is?
Installation. When you send shit out and it's wired wrong or hooked up, pipes are being.
That's where it shows up for sure.
That's where you see it.
The thing that I see is
transportation.
Transportation and shipping's big. But as an industry, if you think about manufacturing quality programs and construction quality programs, very different, right? And so we're putting out sheet and spec style design, maybe a Revit model with some attributes in it, but it's designed for construction, right? And all the quality specs and tolerances and call-outs are construction. I think there's an opportunity for somebody to figure out how to translate that to production, right? I think the QA/QC plan and requirements for production or manufactured infrastructure looks very different. We see a pretty significant gap there.
I could see the manufacturers themselves, like the MPS, is finding a lot of value in this because they have a massive supply chain that they're managing on their own as well.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to the product itself, those companies that right now have people with spreadsheets that are managing all these things, I guess your Katalyst software is intuitive enough to where I could export all those CSV reports or Excel reports into your software.
Yeah, we'd have to map the fields and that sort of thing, but we have a whole team of data integration folks that work on that side of things.
Do you have people so you were saying let's say it's the operator, the data center operator buys the license and they're the ones that are using it and they have a license, they could log in and do all their shit. Do they have the ability to give access to all their vendors and just say, hey, you populate this?
Exactly. So good question. So probably where we spent the most time building, and at least me being frustrated, right? I'm sure it's hard to be a software developer working for me because I don't know that as well, right?
Sure.
So I'm learning it along the way. But this was one of the areas where I'm like, well, why is this taking so long? Is exactly that, user management and access control. Because we need to be able to control both up and down within a product. So do I want to give this partner access to everything in my library? Sure. Do I want to give them access to one package? Do I only want to give them access to the skid-based steel drawings, right?
Sure.
So up and down and then left and right across the attributes. Do I want them to just have access to the reference design?
So you need all these a Katalyst administrator. Someone has to be
It's pretty easy to manage now, and I can see why they took so much time to do it, right? It's just it's a matrix, and you manage your users. But yeah, that's a big part of what we're doing is making sure that we can control the right information with the right partners.
So, keep going.
No, I was going to say, when you talk to some of the guys, particularly in the EV and battery space that are running these big programs, they're very worried about how disseminated their designs have become, right? Because they get issued in full to thousands of partners, right? And the truth is, even with NDAs and control of that, they don't really know where these go, right? So being able to partition information and making sure the right people sort of need-to-know basis becomes very important. And frankly, not in the data center space, but with some of our other clients, I think that's been a sort of major selling factor for us.
I imagine a lot of places that have security structures built around the data center side of it itself would love to see that, where no one has the full picture of everything.
And you can do a lot of that in BIM 360, right? It tends to not be real elegant at times.
So where do you see Katalyst going? And what do you see? It sounds like your biggest competition right now is the person that's on a team that has a spreadsheet.
I think that is it, right? We often say sometimes the people we're selling to are also the people that we're selling against, right?
Sure.
It is that side of things. I want us to focus on getting better and better at what we do, right? Stay narrow on supply chain. Get more towards a self-serve model, right? Meaning a lot of the integrations that we set up right now, we set them up behind the scenes, right? And we have a team of software engineers that help with that. But I want to make that something that you or I could do without training, right? If I need to integrate, let's say, a certain lead time for a certain package from a certain vendor. I want to be able to do that with a couple clicks. So kind of reducing the friction around a self-service model. And I think kind of figuring out who we partner with in the ecosystem, who we integrate with, because when you consider, like, yes, there's design management packages, there's product lifecycle management packages, there's MRP systems and ERP systems, manufacturing execution systems, right? Transportation management, warehouse management. Like the complexity of a supply chain is much more significant than I think people realize. So making sure that we figure out how to bring those all together, like, again, in a very low friction way, is where we go. I hope we don't like get bought. I hope we don't, end up like becoming very narrow on being like in the Autodesk ecosystem versus the Dassault or 3DS ecosystem versus the Siemens ecosystem. Like, we want to stay tech agnostic because we think that's important. So, I mean, where we go will be where our customers tell us, but like that's sort of where my head's at right now as far as where we take things.
But are you continuing to evolve what you currently have built to try to find a way to help that land where you have a greater adoption rate for it, right? And it could be by, like I said, I think what you offer is something that there's going to be there's a strike zone for everything, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a strike zone for your product, and there are people that don't know your product or don't know you or don't know that there's a product like this that exists already that they have access to, and they just look at it as, let's be honest, there's a lot of brain damage that goes into some of the things that you're talking about, right?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
So you're trying to get your hands on all the hairy pieces of a program that are, in many respects, what make you the most vulnerable throughout that program is that supply chain. And you're trying to get your hands on that, and it takes a huge effort, right? So I could see how, selling it with an administrator or some services that say, hey, look, and we're going to help get the training wheels going before you are. No one wants to buy a software product that is amazing and does a great shit, but they can't implement it, and they don't know how to stand it up, and they don't have the habit, the discipline, or the labor to be able to maintain it, because it's only as good as the data you're going to continuously put into it, right?
That's right.
So however you go and you find, you're going to continue to refine who's the people that you just need to get in front of because they already know the product and they see the value in it. When you are done, what will you do for the remaining part of the technology itself? Because there's the strategy to get it to the market and the technology as it continues to evolve. How are you constantly trying to look for a production incubator of like, where are you getting your data from on how you need to evolve? Yeah.
So we've got what's called an early adopter program. So we've limited ourselves to 6 GCs, 6 owners within that program. And so they sort of get white glove service. They get what you're talking about. They get people assigned to them, more embedded, high touch. So they get commercially, however you want to say it, right? They get good commercial terms. And so with those good commercial terms, they also are asked to like participate in user surveys. And so they work with our product management team.
There you go.
They get feedback. They talk about their problems. The product management team tries to get them away from solutioning to focus on sort of the structure of their problems. And then we integrate that into our product roadmap. So that's sort of the near term, is that early adopter program, gather that feedback, let it push things forward. Now we have a few things in play right now. Like we've rolled out sort of our first offering was the package library, which is top end. Now we're rolling out the project module, which allows for cloning and localization, workflow management, production tracking and management, documentation, workflow management within the supply chain to get it to those operations teams at the job site so they have the right information. The site handovers for the installing contractors, that's all sort of very, very, it's either released or very near term. Beyond that, we'll focus on sort of our mobile applications and our reporting and analytics side of things. But then anything else in the roadmap really comes from what do those early adopters tell us and what do users tell us, right? Because it doesn't really matter what we think to an extent, right? Like if I think one thing and 10 customers think another, they're 100% right? So we need their information more than we need ours. We have a very robust platform now. So we need to pause and like let the market tell us where to take things.
Gotcha. Well, you started this. The genesis was FIA 1.0, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was part of it when I was at Google. It certainly
Is that how you
led me in that
discovered?
direction.
Like doesn't sound like you stumbled on it necessarily, but like in your efforts, you discovered that this is, if you could just allocate this data and spread it out so you could see it in this method, you can steer the ship better that way.
I think it's what helped me think about offsite construction more like offsite manufacturing or production, right?
Well, what have you evolved since then? I mean, like, what's stopping you to go to a Google, I guess, type of thing? And would they, knowing now what you know, and probably knowing that you've invested more time into evolving that application than anybody else, are those the types of people that would find value in it today?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right. And I mean, we have customers that we can't say who their names are, but like, yeah, in that space.
Gotcha. So, all right, well, listen, I guess if anybody else, if they only listened to this whole podcast and took one thing away from what Katalyst DI is, what do you want them to know?
I think I'd want them to know that we're focused on helping them improve the way that they manage their supply chain and their offsite production, right? And we're willing to be flexible and a good partner to make that happen for them.
And if they take that product and they incorporate that into their standardization as a byproduct, is it fair for them to expect a reduction in future costs along some method?
I mean, look, we've seen cost come down from, let's say, iteration 1 to iteration 5 at 40%. Kind of understanding should cost and understanding moving from sort of a bespoke first of a kind production to production at scale. We've seen project engineers, project managers on job sites reduced by 6 to 10 in some big programs, by removing sort of that spreadsheet and phone call mentality to how you track things. But it really depends on what each customer wants. I think maybe one of the biggest surprises is everybody wants something slightly different. Some people really care about repeatability. Some people really care about cost. Some people really care about moving towards an inventory model. And it just, we have to sort of treat each one separately, but there's case studies for most of those in place.
Do you, what was, you said that you're a construction nerd, or you just love that stuff. Your love for construction and optimizing how you could deliver construction better led you to this.
Yep.
Did you ever think that do you miss building data centers now that you're helping others build data centers?
I do miss building data centers. Yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Is that the biggest, the pressure of, going to ICs and requesting capital to build, or is it managing the contractor that lost your transformer? Or
you know what I think it is? It's the tangibility of building a data center and sort of the challenge of pulling together a team around sort of a common mission. And it's not that different when you're building technology, but there's the tangibility of the data center side. Yeah, for sure. Like, I miss that. I mean, you know how it is. It's great to be on a job site. Like, there's
triage du jour.
Nothing better. Yeah, I mean, you maybe avoid triage, right? Hopefully. But
well, no, I mean, like, there is chaos, right? I mean,
there's chaos.
Every time you start a construction project, something that you did not expect puts you all on your heels or your toes and made you have to rotate hard. And
sure.
It'll hopefully callous your brain and you'll become a better builder as a byproduct of that, or it could crush your team, right? So I think that you don't learn from anything that goes right. You only learn from things that go wrong. So that's why, we love that. We love the triage du jour, right? Because if it was easy, then everybody would do it. Right?
Yeah, but the best fire is the one that you avoid, right? Like, because you planned it right. But 100%, you can't avoid everything, right? It's a crazy industry.
And the bigger the program,
there's a crazy amount of variance in every job.
Yeah, and the bigger the program, the bigger the opportunity for, I don't know, my cable didn't show up right. Something didn't show up right because they didn't cover it right when they shipped it from the menu. There's a million reasons.
There's a tree branch in my air handler, right?
Look, man, or I'm just doing regular IST and blowing up UPSs.
These things happen.
So, I mean, there's always something. I think that's what you do when something happens is what hopefully makes a difference on a services side.
Yeah, and I think, hopefully that's where people find their value, is chasing big problems like that, right? Like, and what we aim to do is kind of free up people's time to do that, so you're not wasting a bunch of time to find out, hey, are you going to make that delivery date? Because there's so many more important things to spend cycles on.
Yeah. I mean, I think if people understand what does the process look like to make a purchasing decision for your product, if you paint that picture for them to understand, then they're going to see whatever you want them to see. But if you don't help them understand how to make that purchasing decision, they're left to figure that out on their own. Most of the time, they're going to just stay with their spreadsheet, So I could see how helping people understand how to engage with this product, well, it should hopefully help you have a higher adoption rate of that product, because ultimately what we're leading to, I mean, it's not like pent up demand for what we're doing is decreasing.
No.
And we're only going to take on more pressure and stress as a byproduct of an even more strained supply chain or a strain of labor that we have, right? So people are going to have to figure out ways to adopt new technology to help them have more insight into what it is that they're building on a repeatable scale. Because if not, then they're just crossing their fingers and hope is their strategy, and that's the shittiest strategy ever, right? So I could see how this getting out there. Is there other groups that you're running into that are trying to offer the same thing? But
I think there's a lot of people working on the same problem, or at least the same understanding that more and more construction work moves off-site. Manufacton has an offering. I think they're more focused on sort of workflows from a spooling process into the fab facility. The Project Frog guys, do you know them?
Who are they?
They were a modular builder at some point. Now I think they've just kind of shifted to be a tech company. They've got
Are they out of Louisiana or something?
Kit Connect. No, I think they're out of the Bay Area somewhere, South San Francisco maybe. Let's see, who else is in the space? I think those are the ones that we see kind of show up on RFPs more often than not.
Interesting. So you guys there's an RFP that you guys, so someone has this requirement, they take it to the street.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for growth.
I hope so, man. We're spending a lot of money and time chasing it, so we'll see how we're positioned.
Well, shifting gears, when you quit wrestling, or when you retired from wrestling, what did you do to stay fit and stay active? Because you still look like you could have been in the Army.
I just lifted. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, I love lifting. That's my routine every
All right.
morning.
So what do you? I mean, like just like you lift with your kids,
No, I go to the gym at 4:30 or 5 and get it done before the day starts. That's my routine. I like to wake up with that.
And to that end, you have your Fit watch on, and
I keep track of my heart rate.
Oh, is that what it's for? You're not doing the 4:30 picture like with your watch, like Jocko style?
No Jocko watches. Yeah.
Well, man, is there anything else that you want people to know about you or Katalyst before we?
I don't think so. It feels like we've hit on a lot.
Well, I always do this at the end. I always say, "Hey, look, you have a pretty cool career. You got to do a lot of fun stuff. You were building data centers for the government. You were building AOL data centers. You were doing gigafactories, and you were doing Google data centers. What's your advice to people? I mean, you've been in the industry for how long?
25 years.
Yeah. So what's your advice to people that are looking to get into this industry?
I think keep things simple, right? Like as an industry, I think we tend to overcomplicate things because we're serving complicated customers. So keep things simple and develop like good first principle mental framework approaches, and don't be afraid to sort of fall back on common sense. I think that's the advice I'd give my kids if they said, "Hey, I want to go build data centers."
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
So when you tell people, last question, maybe, what do you tell people you do?
Now or then?
Well, how about this? When you were at Google, what do you tell people you do?
Build data centers, right? Work in construction. My kids think I work in construction.
So when you tell people you build data centers, what do they normally say?
Oh, well, it used to be, what's a data center, right? Yeah. And that's changed. I think people know what data centers are now. So usually it's who do you build data centers for? Right?
Okay. I got you. So I always ask because you could ask 5 different people, get 5 different answers on how to explain I build data centers.
Yeah.
It's not as intuitive as it you would think, right? Because, like I'm building cars. Everyone knows what those are. But it is interesting watching how people describe what data centers are. So I'm doing my best we're getting ready to launch a new marketing campaign that's really focused on, explaining to people what it is that you do if you're in this industry.
All right.
So
you want me to take a shot at that?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So it's a big warehouse full of shelves with computers on them, or if somebody knows what they're talking about, I'll say racks with servers on them. And on one side, You have wires with some infrastructure and devices that make sure electrons never stop moving from the wires, from the utility to the servers. And on the other side, you have some way to reject the heat that's generated from the servers. And on top of that, you're just networking everything together with fiber optic cables to make sure that that information's moving in and out of those servers. And that's it, right? It's that simple.
Not bad. You ever have to work on that one before?
No, but this is keeping things simple, right? Like that's all a data center really is. And we tend to overcomplicate it with different electrical distribution topologies and different ways to reject heat. And yes, there are ways that are better than others, but oftentimes we're arguing about something that really isn't all that different, right? So I don't know. I think I make people crazy because I do like to oversimplify things.
I don't think you can do that enough. I like to overcomplicate things, but I don't mean to do it. It's just in my nature, I guess. But well, listen, is there anything else you want to add before we close this up?
No, just thanks for having me. This was cool. I didn't know what to expect. You've got a really, really cool thing going. So I appreciate the time, man.
And thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Thanks for flying into Austin.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, bud.